because I had viewed my manager as kind of, someone above me. But then when I became a staff designer, actually my manager is kind of my partner. And, now I approach the conversation more around like, how do I give you the information that you need to make good decisions? And, I want to propose things and kind of have you be a thought partner instead of, having kind of potentially an adversarial work relationship.
Welcome to Insights Unlocked, an original podcast from User Testing, where we bring you candid conversations and stories with the thinkers, doers, and builders behind some of the most successful digital products and experiences in the world, from concept to execution.
Welcome to the Insights Unlocked podcast. I'm Nathan Isaacs, Senior Manager for Content Production and User Testing. Joining us today as host is Jason Giles, User Testing's Vice President of Design. Welcome back, Jason.
Hello, everyone, and hello, Nathan. It's nice to be back.
And today's guest is Catt Small. Catt is a staff product designer, game maker, and author of the recently published book, The Staff Designer. She spent her career shaping impactful digital experiences at companies like SoundCloud, Asana, and Etsy. And she's here to share how individual contributors can lead, influence, and drive change without becoming managers. Welcome to the show, Catt.
Hey, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Catt, I was really looking forward to this conversation. It's actually very timely because I've been having career conversations with my own team. So this is great. Before we begin, you've actually had a really fascinating career, Etsy to Asana, a bunch of cool stuff in between, even some game design. Just to kind of ground us, can you walk us through your journey and kind of how those experiences shaped your perspective?
Yeah, I think that it's been a really fun career to have. I honestly got into design and technology at a pretty young age. So I have been playing games my whole life. And around the age of 10, really weird to say, this must have been like 1999. Oh my God. I remember I taught myself how to essentially like make these dress up dolls because I was a huge fan of anime like Sailor Moon. And I just wanted to experiment with fashion. And I found out that, if you essentially like program these dolls, you could like change their clothes and you could have your own original characters. And I was like, wow, technology is magical.
These are physical dolls?
It was digital. It was all like a digital dress-up doll kind of thing. Yeah. So it was like a really good, wholesome period of time. And yeah, me being like a 10-year-old, I was like obsessed. You could literally like illustrate as many clothes as you wanted to. And I just felt like that showed me the power of what technology could be. And so then fast forward a couple of years, I was in high school and I ended up taking I went to this high school that was focused on like the visual arts, performing arts, like different kinds of creativity. And I was an art student there. So I specifically was focused on mostly fine arts. But then there was this one class that was called, I think it was computer graphics. And then I learned, oh, graphic design's a thing. Like, what's that? And so then I ended up diving really deep into that. But that was also around the same time that blogging was getting pretty big. And so I had always been learning about visual art and technology at the same time. So like I was learning the fundamentals of design, but also how to program. And so I was like, okay, cool. Like I like both of these things. I don't know how these are going to combine in the future. And then fast forward to college, then I did actually go to school for graphic design. But then I noticed while I was there that a lot of the other students weren't like the greatest at understanding interaction design. So I was like, okay, I think I'm going to go for that. And then I was also doing volunteer work with some friends of mine to make art for their games, kind of like flexing that other kind of creative part of myself. And so there's always, again, it's been this like intersection. So by the time that I was out of college, I did actually have a junior web design position lined up. And then I also had a lot of understanding of how games worked. And then essentially, as I built my career in design, I've also been building like a partial career in the gaming industry. So I've done a bunch of things on the gaming side. I've made my own games that have been shown in different museums and at different shows. I've also taught people to make games. I currently organize a conference that actually celebrates the creativity of game developers of color in particular. That's been running for like 10 years. And then, yeah, I have my 16-year career as a digital product designer at this point. And yeah, it's really been fun to kind of balance all of those things.
There's so much diversity in experiences and influences on that. Are there some specific aspects, whether it's the game design or your writing ability, that you feel like has really kind of shaped what is uniquely you about your perspective?
Oh, that's so wonderful. Thank you. I do think that, I mean, I guess underpinning all of it is I'm just so fascinated by people and like how they think and how they work. And so a lot of, I mean, even the book itself is something that I wrote because I wanted to understand, how everybody kind of thinks about this role. And I think a lot of my work, my games are definitely like a reflection of kind of my own lived experience. And a lot of the things that I write on my blog are very much that as well. So I think I'm often putting myself out there to kind of see, what resonates with other people. How do other people think about this? And I just want to have a conversation with everybody. So yeah, that's why I also really like public speaking. I think that, you kind of put a signal out there and then kind of see, who is drawn in and maybe is interested in having more conversation about some of these topics.
I really love that. I love the bravery of inviting the conversation. And you mentioned the book, so let's get right to that. The book is called The Staff Designer, and it explores this role that actually often flies under the radar, or has lots of kind of mysticism around it. But it's super critical, I know, to my team and to every team that I've run. But what I think is unique about this is that, like, I guess my first question is, what first made you realize that there was this kind of gap in understanding around how we talk about both defining, but then also supporting this senior level individual contributor, particularly in design?
Yeah, I remember feeling like there might be a gap while I was working at Etsy. I saw a couple of people in this position and I really admired their work. I want to call out specifically my now friend, Jessica Harley. She was the first staff designer that I met that I felt like, oh, maybe I could do what she does one day. Like, I feel like we think really similarly about the work. She's also a prolific blogger, and I definitely recommend checking out her writing. And for a little bit, she was a mentor of sorts when I was working with her at Etsy. And I would just kind of ask her, like, what made you not want to go into management? And, to kind of like take this level up. And yeah, just getting to kind of pick her brain on things a little bit, like opened up the idea that maybe I don't have to become a manager to progress in my career. And at that point, I had actually tried management and found it. There were parts of it that I really liked, but then there were parts of it where I just felt like I was really struggling on the like HR side. And I'm like very, very empathetic, which can be really good. But I think that to be an effective manager, sometimes you have to learn how to create a little bit of distance. And so I think I really struggled. But I wanted to figure out, some what career progression would look like for me. And so while I was at Etsy, I started advocating for myself to potentially be put into that kind of staff position. But I think the language at the time was really unclear. And I think that basically, like, I think managers knew what influence was to them, but I didn't know what it meant. And it was hard to explain those kinds of terms. And so they would say, you have to build your influence skills, like you have to build these certain kind of mushy skills. And I just really literally didn't understand what they meant. And that's when I realized, okay, something is here. And nobody's really like, there was a book called like The Staff Engineer, but there wasn't anything for design. There was The Making of a Manager, but like that's about management. So I was just like, okay, I'm going to keep this in the back of my head. And then eventually, I did actually, so basically about a year passed and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on here, but I'm going to kind of start looking around for a new job. And then I did get a staff position at Asana. And so then I was like, okay, now I've got the role. And it was very quickly apparent what my manager meant by influence. And so I was like, okay, now I can understand in a little more detail what they were saying now that I'm experiencing it. So I'm going to take notes. And then if nobody else has written a book on this in a couple of years, then I will contribute that because I do think that this is something that's missing. So it's honestly like my lived experience of struggling and not really finding very many resources. There was a period in 2021 where Brian Lovin, who did write the foreword for my book, he had been interviewing people for his website, staff.design, and that was a lifeline for me. But that was the only resource that I'd had at any point that actually talked about staff design.
When I saw the title of the book, I was two reactions. One, I was like, awesome, finally, and then, oh, thank you. You go, because even as a leader who is trying to help somebody through these transitions, we're describing it to your point, right? When we talk about influence, impact, those concepts, it's kind of tough. And even as leaders, sometimes we don't have the language to really articulate in a way that, someone will understand. So I'm really excited about that. One of the concepts that you introduce in the book is this idea of invisible work. And I mean, it's just so timely because I literally had this conversation today. Can you talk a little bit more about what that is and how somebody who's moving into this role might think about that or come to terms with it?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think a lot about the concept of like the different types of work that we do essentially. I think when I initially started trying to build influence while I was still a senior designer, I was taking on a lot of team culture work, which is really valuable and critical work. But that tends to fall into the category of what Tanya Riley called glue work, where, you're kind of like filling in the gaps. But if you are doing things that are outside of the realm of what's defined in the career ladder as valuable, then you can end up in a situation where you are making an impact, but it's not the kind that will actually get you promoted or be seen as particularly valuable. And so a lot of the things that I reflect on in the book do touch on how you prioritize your energy to actually put in the kind of work that will result in building that influence and to actually result in the kind of impact that you want to make. So being more intentional. And what that does look like is relationship building. It's a lot of understanding the fears and the concerns of your teammates, of your leaders, and being able to essentially angle your communications to adapt to what those people are prioritizing while still delivering the message that you intend to get across. And that is the kind of stuff that I think that we tend to right now, or before this book, I think a lot of senior designers didn't really have a resource to understand how much of the transition is communication based and based on mindset. So one of the other things that you have to do, for example, is to kind of transition from being told what to do to essentially diagnosing what is important. And that was something that I partially struggled with myself because I had viewed my manager as kind of, someone above me. But then when I became a staff designer, actually my manager is kind of my partner. And, now I approach the conversation more around like, how do I give you the information that you need to make good decisions? And, I want to propose things and kind of have you be a thought partner instead of, having kind of potentially an adversarial work relationship. So I think that's like a lot of the effort. I meet with a lot of people from across the company to kind of stay aware of what's going on. And then you kind of never know when that is going to come in handy. But for example, like semi recently at my current employer, I was I was talking with this brand designer, and, she happened to mention like, oh, hey, we're kind of working on this one project in particular. And then I was in a design crit with several other people on a completely different team. And they mentioned, oh, like our colors are a little bit discordant in this particular way. And I could be like, oh, hey, like I actually know that there's conversation about these things right now, and I can connect you with those people. And, the design director who's running that crit saw that. And those are the little things. So I think there's essentially an investment of sorts in relationships so that you have the information from across the company, and then you can utilize that at certain points in time.
There was a couple things, some words, specific words that you used that I really appreciate. The first one was intentionality, right? So you're doing this invisible work, and we all do it, but even at like a more junior IC level. But I think that mindset shift of like, I'm doing it, but for a purpose, and that provides more kind of direction and meaning, and probably, I'm projecting, but I remember this when I was a staff designer, more fulfillment in that work, in actually valuing, I am doing this and I'm making these connections, or I'm taking this effort for a purpose. I'm designing the process. Absolutely. And that kind of mind shift, I think, is really, really powerful. The other thing that you touched on was the importance of kind of understanding the environment and making a lot of the relationships, understanding kind of the power structures that are at play. That can be a really difficult transition, particularly, I'll speak about myself. It was about the craft, man.
Yeah.
I just want to like do great work. Like, this starts to feel like politics and that kind of stuff. For you, what was your experience, and what kind of skills did you have to develop to help with that kind of transition?
I totally empathize with that feeling of potentially, I like to describe it as being allergic to politics. So I also was at certain points in my career, especially early, like when I was a senior designer, I would say the same thing, like, oh, I don't want to be political about stuff. That stuff's annoying. Like, I just want to do the work. But then I realized that to do good work, to actually get work shipped, a lot of the times you do have to understand the priorities of the people who are especially above you. And you have to treat them as a sort of customer and figure out the right way to convey information to them so that they actually hear you. And then you have to, of course, gather information from them and make sure that you're prioritizing and appropriately integrating them into the process. So when I realized that if I actually wanted to get good work shipped, that I would have to figure out how to politic, it kind of changed my mind a little bit and made me recognize that it is there. I can't change that politics are part of the process. So how can I learn how it works and figure out a little bit more in detail about ways that I can still operate with integrity and transparency, but, to actually benefit my customers, I do need to figure out a way to navigate the system. So that was the big thing for me, was just accepting that I can't change politicking and that I need to, if I still want to be a designer and I want to have more impact, then I've got to figure that out. So the things that I started working on, it was all communication investment for sure. One thing I started experimenting with was, okay, if I say something in a particular way, how does it change the way that it's received? So I started looking into like improv techniques, for example, because I remember taking this one workshop at work, and I believe it was essentially about the difference between like a clear no and then like a yes, and, like, let's modify the idea somehow, and how, that kind of change actually led to, more openness and more conversation. So it was little things like that. I did also start reading some books on the subject. So I read some books about feedback. I read some books about just like being a more conscious leader. I will shout out my now friend, former coach, former manager, and like coworker, Sarah Kramer, for sending me a copy of the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, because when I was in my first staff design role working with Sarah, that book actually really helped me before Brian Levin's website came online. And it had a lot to do with the concept of not being right and focusing more on being curious. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to try being curious instead of, coming into conversations and being like, I'm right, I'm correct all the time. And then I noticed like, oh, if I am not defensive and I'm like, oh, where are you coming from when you say that critique, manager or leader, then people will actually just explain how they think. And then they're like, oh, Catt heard me. And, I actually feel like she cares. And then I realized over time, like how much of our work is mostly like vibes driven, to use, for lack of a better language. But yeah, I realized like a lot of politicking, quote unquote, is just like managing people's emotions. And when I understood that, then I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I can work with feelings. I just thought it was like stabbing people in the back and stuff. And that part I don't like. Like I really am not interested in like that kind of drama. But if it's just, oh, this person's scared, so they're, lizard braining, then we can work with the lizard brain and figure out how to like, kind of turn that off and get to a place where they're seeing clarity again.
I love that. Oh, you're such a designer. I've always said that, designers have all these special capabilities that if applied in different contexts, it can unlock magic. And what you talked about first was empathy, like lizard brain, fear. Oh, here's what could be going on. Curiosity, right? Like, hey, what's really going on? Asking open questions, like getting curious about this, and then experimenting. Well, I'm going to try this approach and see if my language changes. And I think that when young designers particularly understand that they've got all these tools at their disposal that can be applied into their career, into how they manifest or create the outcomes that they're trying to do. They got so much power. It just needs to be directed in the right way. And it's framed in something they're familiar with.
Yeah.
And I think you've done a really good job of kind of articulating that, which I really appreciate.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, a lot of this, particularly invisible work, the influencing, making connection, framing the work for others, that takes an incredible amount of energy and time. In your book, you talk about energy audits. I think that's very interesting, and thinking about how to manage energy in effective ways. What would you advise to designers who want to balance doing this great craft while driving, meaningful customer-centered change, understanding that there's this other thing at play, which is just energy?
Absolutely. Yeah. As people, we have a certain amount of time in the day, and we also have waves of energy that ebb and flow. And so it is really important as part of this work, when you're operating at this level, that you recognize when you tend to be at your best, or what kind of environment you need to be in to be at your best. And a big part of that is looking at your calendar, for example, and understanding, okay, I tend to, be the most clear-headed at 3 p.m. So I'm going to try to have my meetings, either after 3 or before 3, depending on your logic there. Maybe you want to have more focus time so you can actually, deliver work. So you want to be the most clear-headed for that kind of effort. Or maybe you want to be your most present self in crits. So you want to, have crit at 3 or something like that. Those are some of the things that I kind of think through and recommend that people consider. I also recommend this practice. Shout outs to Laura Hogan for this one. Color coding your meetings and understanding how combinations of meetings can result in how you feel and how well you can function as a designer. That's also really valuable for, again, being able to recognize shifts you need to make potentially. So one thing I realized, for example, was that if I had a 30-minute meeting and then a 30-minute break and then another 30-minute meeting and then another 30-minute break. If you just do that the whole day, for me, I'm exhausted and I don't ever have enough time to actually progress. And so I actually ask people now to chunk meetings with me. So it seems maybe counterintuitive, but I actually usually will set a one-to-one, for example, to be 25 minutes long instead of 30. So if I need to get water or anything like that, then I've got my break. But then I want to have those meetings right after one after another. And I can do that for probably 3 hours, and then I need focus time after that. And I usually try to have blocks of 2 hours at least for my focus time. I think, if you go 3 to 4 hours, then it can be kind of a lot of focus time. So there, you might want to have a break in between. But these are the kinds of things you need to start to understand about yourself to make sure that your calendar is, designed in a way that makes you most effective. And then you can start to think about, okay, what's the allocation of my time? So how much time do I want to spend on, forward looking, 1 year out, 2 year out kinds of work versus thinking about immediate priorities? That's another way that you can also manage your energy as well. And so you can do things like, consider how you want to do that. And then you can go talk to your manager and say, hey, I propose that I spend, 70% of my time on immediate work, shipping right now, and then 30% of my time thinking about what's coming next or auditing the existing product, et cetera, to make sure that we're just capturing any potential new work. And again, if you're treating your manager like a partner and you're treating your PM like a partner as well in terms of how you spend your time, then they will understand what matters to you and they can help you prioritize appropriately. So those are some examples of the way that I think about energy management. And the only reason I can do the amount of work that I do is because I do put in a little upfront effort to make sure that I'm spending my time appropriately.
There's the mindfulness there of spending it and being aware of how you impact. So you've designed a program for you, like, hey, I figured out, like, if I do this chunking of this way and this way, I think that's critically important. I think the other aspect too is having an understanding of and just an awareness of what types of activities or conversations or whatever it is are energy giving versus draining. And like, look, let's be real. Like, we all have to do things that we don't enjoy or that don't give us a bunch, but how do you spread those out throughout your day, without your week? Do you group them all together and get them all done with? Do you get them out of the way first? But again, using your design brain to design your day, your weeks, and knowing that your energy is a resource that has to be managed. And again, it can be used in your context. I also love the fact of, again, this is a very staff level thing to do, of like, as I look at the time that I'm spending, here's where I think I should be spending it. Manager, do you agree? And do you have that support, like that reframing of your manager as a partner in how to make you successful and for everybody to achieve the outcomes that they're wanting. So I just, yeah, I love it. Catt, why am I only meeting you now?
I know.
Okay, so let's go down and let's drop into some gritty stuff with, the role of staff designer. A lot of times you're directing the work of others. And, we see lots of habits that, young designers will have. Let's just talk about like some basics. Like, how do you caution designers around getting into high fidelity too fast? What is your approach to that type of coaching?
Yeah, this is something that comes up a lot in the course that I run about the same topic. We talk a lot about managing the energy of other people, essentially, by creating artifacts at the level of fidelity that reflects the fidelity of your current thinking. And a lot of times what I've noticed is that designers will go from essentially having a conversation with their product partners, for example, and then they will just start making everything in high fidelity. But if you are still figuring out the concept behind the solution, like you may not even fully know what the problem is, if you're solving the right problem, directionally, if the broad concept is the way that you actually want to implement the solution, if you're still exploring, then working in high fidelity can kind of pin you down a bit too soon. And it can also lead to a situation where your leaders in conversations are focused on the wrong thing. So sometimes what I will do is I will literally just make diagrams that are like, here's like an icon of a person and here's an icon of a team. And let's talk about the relationship between these objects. Like I just explain all the objects and how they relate to each other. And sometimes I'll do that even in this, even in the context of like, here's the first milestone. Okay. A user can do these things. The second milestone, a user can do these things. The third, a user can do these. Is this right? Like, let me just show you at the level of fidelity that we are currently thinking products, like what we're thinking of doing, this is my reaction to these things. And so because I'm removing a lot of the interface, we're able to focus the conversation at the right level. And so I do understand that some leaders struggle unless they can really see the visuals of an interface. And so I do think there are ways to get around that. And so that's something I end up talking a lot about with people. And I do have some suggestions in the book as well. I believe they mostly boil down to figuring out ways to clarify that like certain parts of the UI are for placement only. So for example, can you redact text? Can you use like a different color and kind of overlay a different color to make it clear? Like, this is just an idea. Like, even if you do have to use a relatively moderate level of fidelity because, your audience needs that kind of thing to understand a concept, you can still make it clear what they should be focusing on. And that is actually the point, like we are directing focus as designers. And essentially the book and like the way that I work, I'm trying to encourage people to use the same skills they use, as you mentioned before, for their customers, use that for how you operate in the role. So, leadership is an audience. They're your customers sometimes. And you have to figure out how to essentially, solve the problem of the communication issue that's at hand. And yeah, if you have to redact some text, but you need to still have the UI look pretty nice, that kind of nets out at like a moderate level of fidelity that explains or communicates very quickly. We're just being hypothetical here. So that's what I think about a lot. Like, how do I make sure that I'm focusing my audience's energy on the right things so that we can make the right decision?
Well, and the additional benefit of that, particularly at the staff level, is so much of that role is ensuring that other people that you're working with have a shared understanding, that foundation, and that ability to abstract and simplify the little diagrams. Here's how this object relates to this, or here's, the key dynamics or the jobs to be done that this person has to do to be able to communicate, tell a story in that context for that audience of designers that then have to go off and really like work through all these things. That is just again, another skill. And so to spend the time developing that both to executive audiences or other stakeholders, but also in your role as a staff designer. So it all kind of fits together.
Yeah. It's been awesome. Honestly, yeah, like these diagrams that I've created, for me, a lot of the times when I create those kinds of diagrams, it's initially just for me to process my own understanding of what people have written in document form. So PMs will often, they like docs, and I love docs as well. I love writing, but sometimes when you write, you have the definition of everything in your head and you read the doc the way that you wrote it, but then other people can interpret it completely differently. And I find that, it is helpful to have some kind of a visualization to make sure that you actually understand. But I think a lot of people assume that the visualization needs to be actual interface design, when in fact, sometimes traditional, this is the graphic designer in me talking, but like traditional communication design can often be just as good. So if you have a diagram outlining the different concepts, then yes, you can show the relationship of objects without having to actually start talking about how you treat the user flow, which is a whole different conversation in my mind.
Totally, totally. Well, Catt, we can't have a podcast episode these days without bringing up AI.
Fair.
You've just written a book, you've coached, you mentor, you're a leader in your own right. What are you telling designers these days around how to be thinking about AI, how you see it impacting the future of their work? And then maybe, what should they be thinking about investing in order to stay ahead, but also don't lose that human connection?
Yeah, I think my hypothesis, because we're all still learning, is that AI for me feels like it is another tool in the toolkit that we can use to convey information. So it can be really helpful for doing research, for example. I definitely encourage people to, use it as a kind of like light research assistant that you then review afterward. It's a really powerful intern essentially. I think that my preference and my experience has been that like you should always be the creative director, as people have said, because I don't think it should be doing the thinking for you. And this is definitely me parroting a bit of like, talking points and stuff, but essentially, like, as far as I know, my understanding of how it works is it's kind of like summarizing a bunch of things. So if you are using a tool that summarizes and kind of like creates like an average, then if you're trying to use that to create new ideas, I mean, like maybe it'll do weird things that are maybe sometimes fun and interesting, but I still feel strongly that designers are there because like we are part of this industry because we think critically, and we take what we learn from people, and we try new things, we experiment. So I think there's always going to be room for that, and I think that AI is a great tool that exists within our toolkit to help us experiment and learn, potentially faster sometimes. Sometimes it's also slower. So I do want to also call out, like, sometimes I've just given up and just like, made a prototype the traditional way because it actually is faster than like rewriting the prompt like 7 times and being like, this is still wrong. Like, I feel like I'm like, I got the robot's, head in my hand and I'm just like, look at it, it's wrong. And so I don't know. I think it's like helpful. And I always encourage people, especially staff and above designers, we need to be at the forefront, like learning how to incorporate these tools into our toolkit and modeling what good design looks like and what good process looks like for other designers. But to me, it's just like auto layout. Like when auto layout came out, I was like, all right, I got to figure out how to use this one, like they're the same to me.
That's really funny. I give you much more credit because I'm just detached.
Yeah. Oh, no.
I'm afraid to say that I've gotten to that point in my career where it's like, I just don't have the time to learn this particular thing.
I get it.
I get it. One of the things that's interesting as you talk about it in context of, you're being an art director and it being your intern is just that the importance of maintaining the discernment, and so when I talk to folks, it's like anything that is going to feed your point of view and your criticality, right? Like we can't lose that. And so, there's lots of interesting applications of that, of how we can actually mold it into for good.
Yeah.
And not diluting our experience. Okay, I'm going to one last real question. This whole experience of writing a book around this transition into staff, I would not be surprised if you had some surprises yourself in reflection as you went through this journey. Would you do you have anything like that you'd care to share?
Gosh, yeah. I mean, it was a really cool experience getting to spend the past year and change, reflecting on 16 years of my career and like speaking with so many incredible people as part of this process as well. Like, it's not just me blogging. It is, in fact, I also interviewed almost 30 people, many designers who are individual contributors, and a lot of people who manage them as well. And yeah, I think the mindset shift is really the thing that I would want to underscore for people. It's the number one thing that I see when I am also teaching in the course and when I mentor people. I think a lot of people feel I wish the industry worked this way. That they wish that, for example, their manager was able to really coach them, and they wish that they had like they were just told what to do. But the reality is that one of the reasons that I have been consistently successful is that I've pretty much had to trust in myself and figure out how to, kind of build my intuition so that I trust that I will just figure it out. And, you will be able to partner with the people around you, and you can communicate and be transparent about the decisions that you're making. But the more that you trust yourself and put your perspective forward, obviously in a respectful way, that's when people see, oh, wow, like this person's a leader. So if you want to be a leader and if you want to be at the staff level, like you do have to step into that. It is really uncomfortable at first. It's really overwhelming. And honestly, like I was in the room with these directors and I was like, y'all trust me? Like, that's weird. Like I still felt like a 12-year-old. I was like, I'm a teenager. Like, why am I here? But in fact, I was like 30. But yeah, I think that, it's very normal and natural to not trust your intuition. But over time, once you get to that senior level, you do have a fair amount that you can pull on, and you need to start making that move. So yeah, I really just recommend, considering how to build your own confidence essentially in your work and your experience. And I do talk about part of this as well, kind of like battling that humility and like how you make that shift in the book. But yeah, that's that's one of the biggest things when I reflect on my career that I'm really proud of myself for doing.
That is amazing. Well, I congratulate you on your journey, because it's really inspiring. We've talked about the book a lot. It's called The Staff Designer. Where would our audience be able to pick up a copy?
Yes, you can get The Staff Designer on Rosenfeld Media's website. You can also, if you must, you can also get it on Amazon, I guess. It's what it is. If you do get it there, please leave a review. But I definitely encourage you to get it directly from the Rosenfeld Media website. And then I believe until the end of February, there's a code where you can get 20% off of the book, and it's just user testing.
Oh, amazing. And where would folks learn more about you?
Yeah.
Should they want to connect or just get a little bit more behind the scenes?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Catt Small, CattSmall, like the adjective, or my website is cattsmall.com. Same thing, 2 T's, 2 L's. And the first name starts with a C. And then I am also on Blue Sky, but that's pretty much the only internet stuff that I do.
Okay. Amazing. Catt, it has been a real pleasure. It's really nice to speak to you, get to meet you. I'm incredibly excited about the book. I think this is a really valuable tool, not just for those out there that are growing their careers, but for the managers and how to support them and really help with the challenges that those folks face. So thank you for that. Thank you for spending the time. We'd love to have you back on the show sometime.
Thank you so much. I'm also a huge fan of your product, so this was really fun.
Great.